years ago, I think Harry was out there. And, funny enough, he was, part of the time, he was attached to the Gurkhas, of whom I've been Colonel-in-Chief for 37 years or something. They're the most wonderful people. So I was pulling his leg and their leg, the Gurkhas, by saying, well, hang on a minute, I've...
Behind the grand gates of Buckingham Palace, a betrayal unfolded that no one saw coming. Queen Camilla, once a symbol of grace and royalty, was caught in a scandal that would shake the monarchy to its core. A secret affair, stolen treasures, the loss of something far more valuable than jewels. As the truth slowly unraveled, King Charles III faced the most heart-wrenching decision of his life. What happens when the person you trust most turns out to be the one who threatens everything you hold dear?
Mother was in complete hysterics. I mean, she took it extremely well, sort of wrapped herself up and went back again. But, everybody was crying at the last one. So that was not one of my finest gymkhana moments.
The royal family's future would never be the same. The folder, no larger than an ordinary manila envelope, contained photographs that would prove to be far more consequential than anyone could have anticipated. These images, taken over a few days between May 11th and May 13th, depicted a scene from a private estate near Windsor. The woman in the photos was immediately identifiable: Camilla, the Queen Consort, wife to Charles. What stood out, however, was the presence of another man in the photos, Edward Langley, a longtime royal employee known for his loyalty and dedication. His familiar face, once trusted within the royal circle, was now under scrutiny. The photographs, clearly high-quality stills, showed Langley and Camilla in an intimate setting, their body language betraying a relationship far more personal than that of employer and colleague. The images, although taken discreetly, left no room for doubt. There was no longer any ambiguity about what was unfolding behind closed doors. What made the situation even more disturbing was the fact that Camilla had been in the company of Langley during a period when she was supposed to be on a wellness retreat, a time that Charles had believed to be a moment of personal reflection for his wife. As King Charles sifted through the photographs, the sting of betrayal began to settle in. His first instinct was to doubt the veracity of the images, but the more he examined them, the clearer the truth became. These weren't just random paparazzi-style shots. They were taken with a level of precision and care that suggested an insider's perspective. The security detail at Buckingham Palace, a group tasked with monitoring the royal family's movements and protecting their privacy, had discreetly provided the evidence. The photos matched up with internal records, Langley's travel itinerary, his movements during that period, all aligning to confirm the suspicions. But the images weren't the only thing that bothered Charles. As the investigation into the matter deepened, something even more troubling emerged. The Royal Vault, a space that housed priceless heirlooms passed down through generations, had been accessed by Camilla during the very time she was reportedly away. In April of 2025, Camilla had used an override code to gain entry to the Royal Heirloom Vault. The vault was a secure location, typically reserved for trusted members of the royal family, and it was tightly monitored. The override code had not been used in years, and yet on April 22nd, it was suddenly activated under circumstances that seemed more than coincidental. On that day, 2 items of great significance had gone missing: Princess Diana's iconic caterpillar earrings and the Spencer choker, a priceless piece of jewelry that was intertwined with the legacy of the late Princess of Wales. These were not just any royal items. They were symbols of a tragic past, connected deeply to Diana's memory. To Charles, these items were irreplaceable. Losing them was not only a personal blow, but a breach of trust, as these heirlooms were meant to be preserved for future generations, particularly for his sons and their eventual heirs. The investigation revealed even more. Surveillance footage from Clarence House, the royal residence in London, captured Camilla's car parked outside the loading area on the same day that the heirlooms went missing. For nearly an hour, the car remained stationary, with no documentation to explain the purpose of her visit. No staff members entered or left the area during this time, and yet something was clearly amiss. The details were beginning to fall into place. Camilla had not only betrayed her marriage, but she had also committed an act of theft against the royal family, a theft that carried with it profound implications for the monarchy's legacy. But as troubling as the theft was, the emotional weight of the situation was what truly gnawed at Charles. His sense of betrayal was amplified by the fact that this wasn't just an outsider violating royal property. It was his own wife, someone whom he had trusted, working from within the palace to carry out this deceit. The discovery of the missing heirlooms was not just an issue of stolen property. It was an emotional violation of the family's history. To Charles, this wasn't just about the items themselves, but about what they represented: the monarchy's enduring legacy, the memories of his late mother, and the irreplaceable bond with his first wife, Diana. The more Charles investigated, the more disturbing the pattern became. Camilla's secure tablet, which had been found in her private room, revealed cryptic messages between her and Edward Langley. The communications were innocuous on the surface, but carried undertones that hinted at something far more complex than just an illicit relationship. The messages suggested a longing for freedom, a desire for something more than just the constraints of royal life. There was an air of possessiveness in her words, a desire to lay claim to what wasn't hers, both in terms of physical items and the life she had chosen to lead. There was no mention of returning the trunk or explaining its disappearance. Instead, there was a clear indication that the items were gone for good. As the investigation took its toll, Charles found himself caught between two conflicting emotions. On one hand, he had concrete proof of his wife's betrayal and theft. On the other hand, he was still grappling with the pain of having trusted someone who had so utterly betrayed him. This wasn't just a matter of infidelity. It was a violation of the royal trust, a scandal that would have long-lasting consequences for the monarchy itself. Charles took his time in processing the information. He wasn't quick to react, but when he did, it was with the full weight of his royal duties behind him. He knew that the future of the monarchy rested on how he chose to respond. This wasn't just about his personal feelings. It was about protecting the crown, safeguarding the royal legacy, and ensuring that the family's history remained intact. Despite the heartache he felt, Charles knew that the time had come for action. The next steps were crucial. A confrontation was inevitable, but it had to be handled with care. Charles wasn't just a man betrayed by his wife. He was the king, and the monarchy demanded a response that would protect its values and its future. The investigation had revealed the truth, but now Charles had to decide how to address it, and how to confront the woman who had not only broken his trust, but had also threatened the very fabric of the royal family. At this point, Charles was no longer just dealing with a personal betrayal. He was grappling with a scandal that had the potential to unravel everything the monarchy had worked for. The weight of the crown felt heavier than ever before, and the decision that lay ahead would shape the future of the royal family for generations to come. As Buckingham Palace continued its usual rhythm, the palace's inner workings were forever changed. The truth had come to light, and there was no turning back. The real question now was, how would King Charles III handle the fallout from a scandal that threatened to shake the very foundation of the British monarchy? The answer to that question would come soon enough, but for now, it was clear that things would never be the same again. As the days passed after the unsettling discovery of the photographs, the atmosphere in Buckingham Palace grew increasingly tense. King Charles III, deeply affected by the betrayal he had uncovered, struggled to come to terms with the full scale of what had transpired. The weight of his duties as king and his personal heartbreak collided, forcing him to take action. He had quietly observed the events unfold, compiling the evidence, and now the time had come for a confrontation. He knew that this moment would not only change his relationship with Camilla, but would also have lasting repercussions on the monarchy itself. On the evening of July 1st, 2025, Charles summoned Camilla to meet him privately in the Blue Room. This was not a scheduled meeting, and certainly not one anyone could have predicted. The royal family, usually so open and formal with its public appearances, was now about to face a private and intensely personal moment that would forever alter their lives. As Camilla entered the room, The atmosphere shifted. The large doors closed behind her, and the staff were dismissed with a simple gesture. This was no longer about royal protocol or public relations. It was about an intimate, quiet reckoning that would either heal the wounds of betrayal or deepen them irreparably. When Charles began speaking, his tone was measured, calm, and controlled. His years as monarch had taught him the importance of restraint, and in this moment, he chose to remain composed despite the storm of emotions that raged inside him. He had gathered the evidence, a series of photographs, detailed reports, and security footage, and now he laid it all before Camilla. The folders, each containing irrefutable proof, were placed carefully on the table in front of her. The time-stamped images, the access records to the royal vault, the missing heirlooms, and the personal messages between Camilla and Edward Langley. All of it was now in the open. There was no room for denial, no way to sidestep the truth. Charles looked at Camilla with quiet resolve, but inside, his heart ached. This wasn't just about a public scandal. It was about his personal feelings, his trust, and the very foundation of his marriage. Yet, as the king, he understood that this wasn't simply a domestic issue. This was about the monarchy's reputation, its traditions, and its future. In front of him sat the woman who had once been his closest confidant, the woman he had shared both joy and pain with, and now she was a source of heartbreak and scandal. But Charles, with his deep sense of duty, knew that emotions could not cloud his judgment. The crown had to come first. He asked her a simple question: "Who is he?" Camilla, startled by the directness of the inquiry, hesitated. Her mind raced, trying to piece together an explanation that would make sense of the situation. She stumbled over her words, attempting to offer an account that seemed as plausible as possible. She spoke of a past acquaintance, of a health retreat she had attended, and of the duties that had kept Charles busy in Parliament. But her explanation felt disjointed, and Charles could see that she was struggling to make sense of the truth she had been caught in. Charles remained silent, allowing the tension in the room to build. He was not angry, at least not in the way one might expect. His emotions were controlled, but they were undeniably present. He had given her the opportunity to explain herself, but the more she spoke, the less her words seemed to hold up under scrutiny. Camilla's account didn't add up. Her body language betrayed her, and her eyes avoided meeting him. It became clear that she was trying to fabricate a story to cover up her betrayal. But Charles wasn't fooled. He knew what he had seen in the photographs, and he knew what the reports confirmed. The truth was inescapable. The conversation shifted when Charles presented another folder, this one containing more detailed records about Camilla's access to the royal vault. These documents revealed that she had entered the vault multiple times between April 18th and April 22nd, using an override code that had been deactivated years ago. This wasn't just a matter of carelessness or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act. Camilla had entered the vault without proper authorization, and, on one occasion, had taken a trunk that was never returned. Charles could see the panic in Camilla's eyes as he spoke of the vault and the items that were now missing. He mentioned the caterpillar earrings and the Spencer choker, two priceless pieces of royal history, now gone. The silence in the room deepened as the weight of his words sank in. At this point, Camilla's composure began to crack. Her face turned pale, and her lips trembled. She attempted to defend herself, but her words lacked conviction. She had no explanation for her actions, no justification for the theft. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no escaping it. She had not only violated the trust of her husband, but she had also betrayed the legacy of the royal family. The missing heirlooms were more than just valuable items. They were symbols of a history that could never be replaced. The anger Charles felt was not just about the personal betrayal, though that hurt deeply. It was about the loss of something far more significant: the memory of Diana, the woman who had once been beloved by the nation, and the connection to the past that had been stolen away. As Camilla sat there, Struggling to formulate a response, Charles continued to push. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make his point clear. This wasn't a petty argument between a married couple. This was an issue of royal duty, of protecting the family's legacy, and of ensuring that the monarchy's history remained intact. The stolen items weren't just heirlooms. They were the soul of the royal family, and Camilla had taken them without a second thought. The confrontation, while quiet, was intense. It wasn't about shouting or accusations. It was about facing the truth. And in that moment, Camilla could no longer deny what had happened. She could no longer deny the affair, the theft, or the betrayal. The silence in the room spoke volumes. Charles didn't need to say any more. He had made his point. Camilla's actions had been exposed for all to see, and the consequences would be far-reaching. As the meeting came to a close, Charles instructed Camilla to leave the room. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. There was no yelling, no dramatic outbursts, just the quiet understanding that something had irrevocably changed. Charles knew that the confrontation was far from over, but it had been necessary. He needed to understand the truth, and now he had it. The emotional toll on him was immense, but as the king, he knew that the royal family had to move forward. The monarchy couldn't afford to be distracted by personal betrayals or scandals. The legacy of the crown was at stake, and Charles knew that he had to protect it at all costs. As Camilla left the room, she was met with a new reality. The royal family, once her support system, had now become the backdrop for her downfall. The consequences of her actions were only beginning to unfold. There would be no grand confrontation, no public spectacle. Instead, the monarchy would act quietly, with precision, to ensure that the damage was contained. Charles had made his decision, and the next steps were already in motion. This was no longer just a personal issue. It was a matter of royal duty and the future of the monarchy. In the days that followed, the quiet actions taken by the palace would shape the fate of Camilla. Her access to royal properties was revoked, her duties as queen consort were stripped away, and her role within the family was permanently altered. The public would never know the full extent of what had happened behind those palace doors, but the repercussions would be felt for years to come. For now, the royal family had to focus on healing, on restoring trust, and on moving forward with a sense of purpose and dignity. The damage had been done, but the monarchy was not finished. It would survive, and it would endure, even in the face of betrayal. The events of July 1st marked the beginning of a new chapter for the royal family, one that would be defined by the decisions made in the quiet rooms of Buckingham Palace. While the public might never fully understand the gravity of what had transpired, the truth had been laid bare for those who mattered most. And for King Charles, there was no going back. The future of the monarchy had to be secured, no matter the personal cost. In the days that followed the tense confrontation, Buckingham Palace was filled with an unsettling quiet. The emotional fallout from the events of July 1st was still raw, but Charles knew that time was of the essence. Camilla's betrayal was no longer a private matter. It had implications far beyond their personal lives. The damage done, both to their marriage and to the monarchy, was undeniable. Charles had already made the difficult decision to remove her from royal duties. But now, he needed to ensure that the palace and the royal family could begin to heal. Despite the pain of what had transpired, Charles was not someone who could dwell on personal grievances. As king, his responsibilities were clear. He had to protect the integrity of the monarchy, and in this moment, that meant taking decisive action. The quiet, yet forceful steps that followed would mark the beginning of Camilla's quiet removal from the royal sphere. Her access to the royal vaults was revoked, her role as queen consort stripped away, and her name quietly erased from royal duties. It was not a dramatic spectacle, no press releases, no public outbursts, but the effects of these decisions were far-reaching. Charles knew that while the personal betrayal hurt deeply, the monarchy had to move forward. He spent countless hours in his private study, reviewing the details of the investigation and the evidence he had gathered. His thoughts were occupied with the repercussions of Camilla's actions, but also with the future of the monarchy. The royal family had endured countless challenges over the years, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just a scandal or a public relations nightmare. It was a breach of trust at the highest level. Charles had trusted Camilla, and she had taken advantage of that trust in the most damaging way. The public was unaware of the full extent of what had happened behind the palace doors. In fact, the decision to remove Camilla from her royal duties was made with such precision that it initially went unnoticed. There were no public announcements, no grand gestures, just a quiet reorganization of her role within the palace. Camilla's personal staff were reassigned, her access to royal properties was revoked, and her name was removed from royal events. The changes were subtle, but to those within the palace, they were unmistakable. The royal family had made it clear that Camilla's position was no longer relevant. She would no longer be a part of the royal life she had once shared with Charles. While the palace staff worked tirelessly to implement these changes, there was one person who observed the situation closely. Princess Anne, always perceptive and astute, had noticed the shift in the atmosphere. She was not someone prone to displaying her emotions, but even she could sense the weight of the betrayal that had taken place. She had always been a strong and vocal advocate for the monarchy's integrity, and now, as the palace adjusted to the new reality, she became an even more prominent figure behind the scenes. Anne had long understood the importance of protecting the monarchy's legacy, and she was determined to ensure that the palace remained strong in the face of this crisis. As the days passed, the public remained largely in the dark about the details of the situation. The royal family had made sure that the matter was handled discreetly, with no leaks to the press and no public statements. But despite the palace's best efforts, the truth began to trickle out. The media, always eager for a story, picked up on the changes within the royal household. And soon, whispers of Camilla's removal began to spread. The first indication that something was amiss came with the quiet removal of her profile from the royal website. It was a small action, but it spoke volumes. Camilla's name was no longer featured alongside Charles's, and the page that had once celebrated their partnership was now blank. To the public, it was an indication that something had shifted within the palace, but the full scope of the changes was still unknown. Behind closed doors, however, the impact of Camilla's actions was being felt deeply. Charles, still processing the pain of betrayal, had to take action not just to protect the monarchy, but to preserve its future. He knew that his response would set the tone for the royal family's future. The monarchy could not afford to appear weak or divided, especially in the face of such a personal scandal. The palace needed to be strong, and that strength would come from the actions Charles took in the coming weeks. He was determined to maintain the dignity and respect of the royal family, even as the situation with Camilla played out in the background. As the investigation into the missing heirlooms continued, it became clear that there was more to the story than anyone had initially realized. The items taken from the royal vault, Diana's cherished jewelry, were symbols of the monarchy's history, and their disappearance had shaken the family to its core. Charles had always seen these heirlooms as a connection to the past, a tangible reminder of the royal family's legacy. Losing them was not just a theft, it was an assault on the monarchy's very identity. The loss of Diana's items was symbolic of a larger issue, an issue of trust, of respect, and of the monarchy's values being violated by someone who had been entrusted with the family's most sacred objects. But as the situation unfolded, another key figure began to emerge. Princess Catherine, who had long been a figure of grace and dignity within the royal family, began to step into a more prominent role. Catherine had always been someone who valued the monarchy's traditions and history, and now, as the family dealt with the fallout from Camilla's actions, she became the embodiment of those values. The public, who had once been uncertain about Catherine's place within the royal family, now began to see her as the steady force holding the monarchy together. Her quiet strength and unwavering commitment to the royal family's legacy became more evident than ever. While Camilla's life continued to unravel, Catherine quietly began to make her mark on the future of the monarchy. In the weeks that followed, Catherine took on a larger role in the management of the royal vaults and the preservation of the family's most valuable heirlooms. Her actions, though subtle, spoke volumes. She worked with Anne and the palace staff to ensure that the royal collection was secure and that any discrepancies were thoroughly investigated. Catherine's quiet efforts to preserve the monarchy's legacy were not lost on the public, and her popularity surged. The media, once focused on scandal, now turned their attention to Catherine's steady leadership. As Camilla was quietly removed from the royal circle, Catherine's influence grew. She took on a more significant role in the royal family's day-to-day operations, supporting Charles as he navigated the complexities of royal life. Her actions were not fueled by a desire for power or attention. Rather, they were driven by a deep sense of duty to the monarchy and to the legacy of her late mother-in-law, Diana. Catherine's commitment to preserving Diana's memory and ensuring that her legacy was honored became a defining feature of her time as a member of the royal family. Her actions spoke louder than any public statement could, and the people of Britain began to see her as a symbol of the future of the monarchy. As the days turned into weeks following the removal of Camilla from her royal duties, Buckingham Palace began to regain a sense of normalcy, though it was clear that the royal family was still reeling from the effects of the scandal. While Camilla's downfall was not made into a public spectacle, the ripples of her actions were still being felt. The quiet, methodical steps taken to remove her from the royal fold had been swift, and while the palace had managed to keep the details under wraps, the public couldn't help but notice the changes within the royal family. The first sign that something had shifted came when Camilla's profile was quietly removed from the royal website. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, but to those who paid attention, it spoke volumes. Her name no longer appeared alongside King Charles's, and the section that had once celebrated her role as queen consort was now left vacant. It was a subtle move, one that didn't scream for attention, but it was clear that the monarchy was distancing itself from her. At the same time, the palace began to make adjustments behind the scenes. Camilla's staff were reassigned, her personal duties were slowly removed, and her role in the public eye began to fade into obscurity. But while Camilla's presence in the royal fold was being quietly erased, another figure began to emerge as a beacon of stability for the monarchy. Princess Catherine, who had long been seen as a supporting figure within the royal family, began to step into a more prominent role. Her calm demeanor, grace under pressure, and deep sense of duty to the crown made her the natural successor to carry the mantle of leadership in the face of the turmoil surrounding Camilla's scandal. Catherine's quiet strength became more evident than ever before, and the public began to see her in a new light. Catherine's rise was not about seeking the spotlight, but rather about fulfilling the duty that had been placed before her. She did not crave the attention of the media, nor did she seek to overshadow anyone else in the royal family. Instead, Catherine's actions spoke louder than words ever could. She took on an increasing number of responsibilities, including playing a key role in overseeing the management of the royal vaults, ensuring that the family's precious heirlooms were safeguarded and that any discrepancies were addressed with the utmost care. It was a role she took on with dignity and commitment, understanding the weight of the history that was entrusted to her. Her efforts did not go unnoticed. The media, which had once focused on the scandal surrounding Camilla, began to shift its attention to Catherine. Her calm and steady leadership became the centerpiece of royal coverage, and the public, who had once been unsure of Catherine's place within the royal family, now saw her as a stabilizing force. Her popularity surged, and she was increasingly seen as the future of the monarchy, not just through her marriage to Prince William, but through her own merits and character. It was clear that Catherine had become the anchor the royal family needed during this turbulent time. Meanwhile, as Camilla's life continued to unravel, there was a quiet but undeniable shift in the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace. The emotional and personal toll on Charles was still evident. The pain of betrayal was something he carried with him. But he also knew that the monarchy could not be defined by scandal or personal heartbreak. As the weeks passed, Charles began to make decisions that would ensure the royal family remained intact. The monarchy's strength lay not just in its traditions, but in its ability to adapt and move forward in times of crisis. Charles's leadership, while marked by personal sorrow, was a testament to his commitment to the crown and its future. As the days wore on, the palace worked diligently to address the public fallout from the scandal. The royal household's PR team, which had once been devoted to managing Camilla's public image, now found itself shifting focus. The team was reassigned to work on enhancing the public profiles of other members of the royal family, particularly Catherine, who had become a shining example of what the monarchy stood for. Behind closed doors, the royal family began to focus on ensuring that Camilla's actions did not define the future of the crown. The royal vaults, which had once been a symbol of the monarchy's heritage, were now at the center of scrutiny. The stolen heirlooms, the priceless pieces of jewelry that had once belonged to Princess Diana, were never returned, and their disappearance had left a gaping wound in the family's history. But as the investigation into the missing items continued, it became clear that the damage done by Camilla's actions extended far beyond just the loss of material wealth. It was a betrayal of the royal family's legacy, and it threatened to tarnish the very foundations of the monarchy. Despite the pain of what had happened, Charles understood that the monarchy could not afford to be defined by loss or scandal. As the investigation continued, Catherine worked tirelessly to ensure that the family's heirlooms were protected. Her role in overseeing the vaults and ensuring the safekeeping of royal artifacts was now seen as crucial to maintaining the monarchy's reputation. She became a symbol of the continuity of the royal family, embodying both strength and grace in the face of adversity. In the midst of all this, Camilla remained in the background. Her role within the royal family had been reduced to that of a figurehead, someone who was still technically the queen consort, but had lost all real influence within the palace. The quiet removal of her duties continued, and her name was gradually erased from public documents and royal events. While there was no formal announcement regarding her removal, it was clear to those within the palace that she was no longer a part of royal life in any meaningful way. The public, for their part, began to notice the shift. Camilla's once prominent position had been replaced by Catherine's quiet yet powerful leadership. The media, which had once focused on Camilla's scandal, now turned its attention to Catherine's rise. The public, who had been deeply invested in the drama surrounding the royal family, now saw Catherine as the future. Her calm demeanor, her grace under pressure, and her unwavering commitment to the monarchy made her the clear successor to take the crown when the time came. As the media continued to shift its focus toward Catherine, the mood within the palace began to change. Charles, while still deeply affected by the betrayal he had suffered, understood that the future of the monarchy was secure. The royal family had weathered this storm, and it had emerged stronger as a result. The family's commitment to its history, its traditions, and its legacy remained unwavering, and Catherine had proven herself to be the rock upon which that legacy would be built. For Camilla, however, the fall from grace was a slow and painful one. Her life, once filled with royal duties and public appearances, had become one of isolation. Her children, Tom and Laura, visited her occasionally, but their brief visits only highlighted the distance that had grown between them and their mother. The public, once fascinated by Camilla's role within the royal family, now looked upon her with disdain. The media, which had once portrayed her as a transformative figure in the royal family, now painted her as a symbol of betrayal and deceit. Her life, once filled with luxury and privilege, had been reduced to a quiet existence. Camilla's personal staff had been reassigned, her access to royal properties had been revoked, and her name had been erased from public records. The palace no longer acknowledged her role as queen consort, and her title was now little more than a formality. The once powerful woman who had stood at the side of the king was now a mere shadow of her former self. a woman cast aside by the very institution she had once been a part of. As the weeks turned into months, the focus of the royal family shifted away from the scandal and toward rebuilding the monarchy's image. The royal vaults were secured, and Catherine continued to play a key role in preserving the family's heritage. The public, who had once been captivated by the drama of the royal scandal, now looked to Catherine as the future of the monarchy. Her quiet strength, dignity, and commitment to the royal family made her the ideal person to carry the crown forward. For Charles, the pain of betrayal would never fully disappear, but he understood that the monarchy had to move on. The events of the summer of 2025 had been painful, but they had also been a turning point for the royal family. The future of the crown was secure, and the legacy of the monarchy would continue, thanks to the leadership of figures like Catherine. The quiet fall of Camilla had paved the way for the rise of a new era for the royal family, one defined not by scandal, but by strength, grace, and unwavering commitment to the monarchy's legacy.